So hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight, City Lights celebrates the publication of a new book from Kelsey Street Press. It's called If and Elsewhere, The Burrow. Jocelyn Saidenberg generated the text, and Cybele Lyle generated the art for this wonderful new book. Before we begin, as is customary, I would like to remind everyone that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. I would like to take this moment to acknowledge those who have come before us as stewards of the land. If and Elsewhere is a compelling blend of word and image. Cybele Lyle and Jocelyn Saidenberg have come together to create a truly intimate and nuanced work, bringing together their complementary sensibilities. Cybele Lyle is an award-winning visual artist whose installation, video, and 2D work explores the subjects of place and identity. She's held residencies at Oxbow, Project 387, the Atlantic Center for the Arts, Headland Center for the Arts, amongst others. Her work has been exhibited across the United States, and Cybele is a recipient of the Kala Fellowship, the Yozo Hamaguchi Printmaking Award, and the Tony Smith Award. Cybele currently lives in Los Angeles and is represented by the Et al. Gallery in San Francisco. Jocelyn Saidenberg is a writer, scholar, and teacher. We've had the great pleasure of hosting her in the past many times. It's really wonderful to have her back with us again. She is the author of several collections of poetry and chapbooks, including Negativity from Atelos Press, Dead Letter from Roof, and Kith and Kin from the Elephants Press. She lives in San Francisco and is the founding editor of Krupskaya Books. Moderating this evening's event is none other than Erin Wilson, who is an editor at Kelsey Street Press. It's really nice to have Kelsey Street in the house tonight. Please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Cybele Lyle, Jocelyn Saidenberg, and Erin Wilson. Such a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here. Yes, I'm Erin Wilson, and I am one of the editors with Kelsey Street Press. We're a collective, so we're all equals together. We've been around for just over 50 years. Last year was our 50th anniversary, and we started as with a letterpress in Berkeley. So we've been obsessive about book design from the very beginning. And then beginning in the early 1990s and for about 15 years, Kelsey Street put out a series of artists and poet collaborations. We, just three of them, May Brusenberger and Kiki Smith did endocrinology. Allison Saar, the artist, with Erica Hunt, the poet, did arcade. Just Whistle a Valentine was by photographer Deborah Luster and poet C.D. Wright. Those are just three out of many. In fact, those books were the first books of Kelsey Street that I knew, and they really helped me shape my ideas of what was possible in a book. So I'm super thrilled to have been able to work on this book, which is the first artist and poet collaboration Kelsey Street has done in about 20 years. I'm not sure what caused that gap. It is expensive and time-consuming to do a book like this, but I know pretty much all publishers would say every book is expensive and time-consuming. I think part of what's really special about doing a book like this is that it requires a degree of cooperation and trust between the press and the poet and the artist that I think could be hard to create and hard to sustain. The three of us, I think, have been very fortunate in that we've been seamlessly working together. But one of the essential things of a poet and artist collaboration like this is that the art and the poetry are weighted equally when it's the book. So they're really just braided together, which means that no one's opinion, no one's work weighs more than anybody else's. So we really, the book is a result of honoring both the language and the art together. Before I hand it over to Jocelyn, who's going to read her work while we look at Cybele's images, I just wanted to spend a minute and acknowledge one of the often invisible people who work on a book, which is the book designer. Kelsey Street has been really fortunate for about 10 years to be working with Jeff Clark. He designs under the name Crisis now. And he was really a dream person to work with on this, like the book that hopefully everybody will be able to hold at some point is really a result of his sensitivity to the words and the images and his knowledge and imagination. So we're really thankful to have been able to work with him. But now I'm very excited that everybody's going to get a chance to hear Jocelyn read, and we'll get to see some of Cybele's images.
All right. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. If and elsewhere, the Burrow. I'm going to read the 3 epigraphs that begin the book. The first one is urns are containers, Barbara Johnson. True, some ruses are so subtle that they defeat themselves. I know that better than anyone, and it is certainly a risk to draw attention by this whole to the fact that there may be something in the vicinity worth inquiring into, Franz Kafka. Here's the thing, that the both and turned into a neither nor does not mean that it was a bad idea to try, Lauren Berlant. Also outside, at the crossroads, a wayward gesture forwarding us on to a self-same burrow, waiting for those who describe. This burrow's night, or the hourless place, or the unplaced hour, or indirection, or out of place and in time with, or whenever holed up with B in B's home and B's, or B and B's burrow, B's, along with us being P and me. Our burrow, practicing at origins and like that. B's dwelling, B's her, this burrow. She occupies much thought, also much planning, and all expense of energy is the understatement she details. Save for the momentary subterranean stillness that though inexorably broken by her own deception, by her owning description and intersections. For if B be growing old, be getting on, not as strong as most as the others, those others, not an us, not a her either, but in particular, those who are all enemy are countless, not even excepting the tiny ones, insignificant pips, whose work B benefits from, for in slender ways devouring just enough and no more. Wherefore, our motto, once being B's mantra, may we be omnia contra omnis. May we both unthing our abode and belong there. She who gestures and who signals, if ever possible, in the consummation of burrowing, B's home, but not yet, she signals. Fearing words. But as B well knows, and as B has recounted to me so often and to P, the others are not only just outside, are also those whose element is B's very homestead, just as much as B's, and B's fear being equally theirs, more, no less than ours, or anybody else's. For this, then, is what most needs describing. Already from the first word, fearing as words, fear, casting out letters here, there, lest all be lost, which is not already a loss or worth the losing. Experimental burrow. B digs one, obviously far from the real one, viz. Her entrance. B digs it B-size. P and I observe that B seems to be digging our own graves, quietly giggling, nice and snug in our beds, lined and sealed, of course, with the moss, just like the real one is. creeping in to close it, covering it completely. B sleeps under B's mossy ersatz blanket. Later, B patiently watches, waits, B's private vigilance, long and short spells at every and any hour, day and night. We have seen this move in the past, we being P and me. We wait nonetheless with great excitement for the instant, that moment, when B flings off the moss and rises from B's experimental hole. It never disappoints. No, never. When B shares observations from the experiment, they're mixed, good and bad. So we debate, we weigh, we elaborate, we iterate, we play out different scenes, games and dramas from which forms, fits, matters, moorings, anchors, and landings. All our rotting and obliging matters. Their magnetism and elasticity are exciting. When B looks with inattentiveness at the phrase we three find ourselves susceptible of, ungovernably fucked and happy. B pants, puffs, bustles. We ignore what we can't contest. B's observations from the Burrow experiment, always beyond yes or no, akin to our game of plus and minus, starting with an ask of or for, a bid as appeal. The game's literally not possible, or just the literal play of our snug hidden parts. Today we call our game the impasses. Here, the pluses and minuses correlate nicely. Here, the winner loses to win also nicely. Also known as the game of exceptions to imaginary problems and their solutions. What a fellowship of anomalies we are, fellows sitting around our experimental burrow, dot connecting like a discipline for living, from so-and-so to so-and-so, where self-explanation is thankfully nothing, where compulsive naming meets at a bullseye resisting determination, shadow explanations oscillating with wind-tossed moss and marginal details, with the dust of worlds. The enemy. We agree, bees are myriad. And we all affirm the enemies and their accomplices are still more numerous. We admit are countlessly multiplying so that B becomes dizzy, who in a rare retreat lapses alongside P and me, where no alarm could alert us now. May there be hours in which that enmity might be assuaged, when B raises above destruction, moves sideways to harm, plays dead in an instant, freezes to a memorial still. But no, we know false assurance is the greatest risk, a threat greater than the multiple perils calculating and figuring. Together, the enemies and their allies and accomplices in sum. What profitless hope for steadfast protection, if we were to be so assured, and not in this half experiment, half enigmatic ground, when we three, B, P, and I, want only to watch over ourselves and over B, P, and me, where we be omnia and omnis alternatingly. And now momentarily, I'm worried about B, who hasn't been seen above or below ground, nowhere covered in her coverings. And the last time B did show did come through the familiar forest pathway. I made things P fears worse, with my attempts to converse and to follow, unintending to pursue, less seeming I feared to be signaling some threat or untoward action vis-a-vis B, pardon me, pardon P, neither pursuing nor fleeing. The platform. It's not resignation, not the approach of passivity, enduring power over us, but we reserve what withholds itself from instantaneous knowing or cipher as our own store of extras, excursus. Pollution is kin to spitting, at least etymologically so. Pythian, I spit you there, to piles of spit, and who and what I need to bribe handsomely with meats, lots of it, a threadbare chicken, and in return, empty enigmas. I'd prefer not to accompany B on certain days, on certain paths, and rather withdraw my conditions. Passwords are loss. For only the lost can replace us, our loss. Only blank pages, the blank pages, even when are only we being passed over. Like a distraction. I'm sitting on B's knee or B on mine, like that, or not like all the others, but like nothing or something. We bury the other half, letting it rot. And there another decision more postponed than before. Experimenting with short spells to collate our observations of that inverted folding tending towards figuring. More this, more that, yet without landing on any method, any approach. We tarry outside without fail, or failing inside without. The library, or yes, the entrance, and yes, the exit. Spoiled by such company, B resolves then unresolves us. By seeing so much and so many, B fails in summoning us to descend, for what would happen would be happening behind our backs, behind the door, after it would be fastened. Meanwhile, we three take advantage of the stormy nights. We bundle in our spoils just below, but has it come off well? What could only be known after our descent will be known, but not by P or B or me, or yes, by B and P and me, but too late. In that it risks itself to summon it, our space inside shaped by those outside, by that presumption of non-internal, non-external menaces and their allies, ever multiplying. And oh, to fill the crack, to gap the cleft between rims and furrows. How recuperate innermost still and empty? Nope, not possible. Silent touting. As if it weren't for this, inside would be that from which our outside is separated. But for the fucking doorway, who shouts risk, touts all perils to our unforeseeable and unmanageable exposure, if only to be not above an insider solely there, not here, but no. With each transition, we risk complete dispossession. Our transposition of words and ruination, leaving above meager remains of maybe moss. The doorknobs. A marked accent prowls the hallways, echoing the tiniest forest leaf, the tiniest wisp of forest moss made to shudder in concert, transforming all accord immodest in compass. B says, This is how something takes root in another, conferred by B as sender. It's difficult to break away, but despite those obstacles that common sense builds as barriers erected for disciplined immobility, we build against habit, against the common sense of obstacles, having erected our she-burrow amongst her nests, cubbies, closets, her corners, passageways, warrens, hallways, and hideaways with moss-lined entrances and exits. Our footnotes, hence, jammed up with outcasts and forgotten wordings, repercussions eluding commonsensical grounds, and a modesty in other words, or in a word, homely. In our solitude, B reads to us, to P and me, and not as a know-it-all judge-all, but addicted as we are to the solicitous, all felicitous enthrallment, ever enthusiastic for submission, made fleshy, secret, and unobtrusive, like some nom-dom inviting to school us in stillness. It concerns us who be that tenuous strap, who bind us of and our uneaten sentence thrown by communion both in and of the dust. I think I'll stop there.
I would like to ask the two, maybe just to get started. First of all, how did this begin? I'm just curious to know, because I mean, just looking at it as a whole, it's such an amazing and gorgeous artifact. And how did you come to this?
Well, I mean, for me to start doesn't mean that I'm going to have the beginning, because I think we all have, there's three beginnings and they all overlap and intertwine in different ways. So I'll start, but it'll go back in time probably at some point in the future. But to say that I had been, after the pandemic, I had been living in Los Angeles. I grew up here and I'd moved back here to be closer to my mom. And after sort of as the pandemic, sort of into the second bit of it, I had been making a lot of work in the studio that was very influenced by being in LA, being close to my mom, and sort of thinking about domestic space and sort of the kinds of fabric and colors that I associated with the domestic space of home as sort of visualized or experienced to my mom. And I had made a series of work that I ended up printing, and it just felt like it was all these fragments that made a lot of sense in the form of a book. And at which point Erin was visiting and came to my studio, and I shared that with her. And I was really excited because I'd sort of made a version of the book. What do you call that? A prototype. And I think I thought at that point, oh, this is the book. You know, I want to make this. I want to get this made. And you know, like so much art, you know, that point that I thought was the end turned out to just be the beginning of what the project ended up becoming. So at that point, maybe I'll let Erin take it from there, and we can interweave back in. But that was where Erin stepped in.
Yeah, and I've loved Cybele's work for a long time, and when I saw this, I just like so immediately wanted Kelsey Street to take it and do, you know, like make it into something. And Cybele was open to the idea, and the other Kelsey Street editors were open to the idea. So we just needed to find a poet that was doing work that was such a like a good fit. And we actually published one of Jocelyn's earliest books back in the late 90s, 2001, sometime like that. And Cybele and I, we've all known each other for a very long time. So it made all, and Jocelyn's press, Krupskaya, did a series of chapbooks that used Cybele's work also. So it was a very easy, natural fit that the two of them, their works would go together. And it just happened to be, and Jocelyn can say a little bit about the text and where that came from, but it just happened to be that the work that Jocelyn had been doing and the work that Cybele had been doing and the dreams and hopes of Kelsey Street all came together really perfectly.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, when Cybele asked me if I wanted to collaborate on this project, it turned out that we were both sort of working on projects that shared a lot of the same concerns. And it was as if we'd already been sharing these kinds of what I came to think of my project as a kind of impossible refuge or attempts at creating a kind of refuge. And that we had both been trying to kind of articulate those spaces in images and writing. So it was kind of amazing that there was that sort of coincidence of projects that we had been working, both of them coming out of the pandemic. And for me, the project, it was like the summer of 21, and I had decided to return to thinking with a short story by Franz Kafka, The Burrow, which was published in 1924, shortly before his death, and it was sort of left unfinished mid-sentence. And just like a quick outline of what I see as some of the concerns from the text that I was working with. The Burrow is written from the first person, written in a first person, and from the perspective of like a badger-like creature who is the builder of a burrow and who feels constantly beset by dangers and predators. And the narrator hopes that the burrow might be a kind of retreat, a sort of secret hideaway that would carefully protect it against all these outer threats, where the inside would be clearly separated from the outside. But of course, there's always this point of transition, this sort of moment of communication between the inside and outside, an exit, an entrance, which is this point of kind of like boundless and unmeasurable risk. And it's also the place and time of what's unforeseeable and uncontrollable. So the burrow for this badger-like creature is far from being a safe haven. Rather, it's always and everywhere kind of exposed to outside threats, where inner space is actually being shaped by the menace of these outer threats. And so there is no inside that can escape relation to the outside. So you can begin to see how these sort of ideas and questions were resonating with this sort of moment a year into the pandemic. And so like halfway through this story, this badger-like creature hears this noise, a very disturbing noise to the creature. And it's like a low whistling, and it's a sound coming, the narrator thinks, from other creatures. And the sound, which is unseen and unlocatable, becomes like an invisible catastrophe for the narrator, which returns them to a sort of earlier moment in their life, a moment before the pre-building of this labyrinthine hoped for protection burrow. And so it's like it's returned to a place with sort of no distinction between home and not home, between inside and outside, and also lacking definition between like a then and a now, where peril becomes everywhere present and threatening. And this is how the story concludes. So you can see that the Kafka stories concerned very much inform both of our projects. And what I came to call sort of shorthand between Cybele and me was the inside-outside problem, which was very, very resonant for us in those years. And so when I first returned to the story, I decided my way of getting close with it to its like material, was to write out the whole story by hand in cursive with my non-dominant hand. And so that is this, which then became an element in Cybele's drawings. in one of the many iterations that came later. And then I began working with like the language and the concerns to create texts. And I chose to populate my text with other characters and letters in a way, because I was interested in exploring forms of connection. And it's as if like the letters were like reaching towards others, and wanting to see if there was some kind of form of, whether it's like hesitant or ephemeral forms of solidarity that I could discover in the project. And so then this thing happens, which often happens in writing projects, where the writing project itself becomes a kind of refuge. So writing about a kind of the impossibility of refuge became a kind of refuge, and a sort of a container for the inquiry and all of the failures and impasses that I encountered there. And it was a place to go, a place to be, where I could begin to make sense or find no sense, and to sort of unfold the inquiry and elaborate the shapes of it, and while also shaping, as I'm saying, sort of a place for thinking and writing. So there was just this amazing kind of convergence of both of our explorations of these kind of yeah, as I've been calling it, kind of refuge or sort of impossible places to resolve this sort of inside outside problem.
Well, and I love that you're saying, like, talking about the refuge, and sort of, because like one thing that to me was so nice about the way our projects came together is that I had these works, and I came and we met in San Francisco together at Jocelyn's house, and we didn't really know what we were going to do or where we were going to go, but I was sort of talking about my work, and then Jocelyn was talking about her work, and there was just this parallel from the start, which created a lot of space for them to sort of weave in and out in a parallel way, like a little wiggly parallel, which was really nice, because it wasn't like one was illustrating the other. And so we sort of decided to embrace that. And similar, like to me, the work I was doing, I had been, those original images had come out of like using fabrics and big, huge, like paint spraying guns and all these things. And there was a shift that happened, which was my own sort of refuge, which is I started exploring Los Angeles just on foot and by going on the buses, basically trying to explore the city by going to different libraries. And so during the day, I would, certain days I would be exploring the city, just sort of wandering around, going to these libraries as a way to go to different neighborhoods. But then I'd come back to the studio, and I didn't want to work big anymore. I wanted to sort of hone in and sort of work smaller. And so I had printed these out, and I started working on them with pastels. And this sort of got influenced then so Jocelyn and I would have these moments of conversation, and then all of a sudden the mapping of like what started as these sort of swaths of color of fabrics of sort of these domestic spaces, I started bringing in the pastel and the line, which on one hand connected to my exploring the city and mapping, sort of a mapping of the city and my processes. But then I was also started bringing in these ideas of the characters in Jocelyn's writing. And so there was this sort of, and again, mine had an inside, outside, exterior, interior component already built in. But then I got to sort of, all of a sudden there were these characters and somewhere in my brain just floating around very loosely that were parallel, and so I think there was this, I mean, I'm just going to say parallel one more time, journeys of both writing, text, and Jocelyn had started her writing much before we met, and I had started my pieces much before we met. And then we came together and just continued. But now, as we were continuing, there was each other's voices in each other's heads, and that without any pressure for it to illustrate. And so that sort of became another phase of the project. if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and there was always that opportunity, in a writing project where you encounter these impasses. And for me, in those moments, typically I would return to something that was one of the initial seeds of the project. But in this case, I could turn to Cybele's images and have that be a way, sort of the indirection that I needed to go to return to the writing. So, and just watching, being so involved with Cybele's process and seeing how these different sort of layering and adding the line, and then beginning to collage in my very tortured cursive using my non-dominant hand. It was like such a gift to be so intimate with that. So I feel really grateful for this whole project and for all the support that Erin has given us all along. Been truly an interlocutor for the whole project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge part of this whole conversation that we're having is, in the beginning, Erin and I were having conversations, and then Jocelyn and I were having conversations, and then Jocelyn and Erin were having conversations, and then the three of us were having conversations. So all of that was interwoven. And then on the side, we were all three doing our work. And so there was a lot of influence without it being like prescriptive. It was really it's unlike any kind of, like, in a way it was very connected to my process, and then in another way it's unlike any other process I've gotten to do before, which felt very liberating and sort of expansive.
One of the things that I was thinking about, which I say a little bit in the afterword, is that I wanted Kelsey Street to be a safe place for the work in a way that the like anxiety, or I wanted Kelsey Street to provide generosity and home in a really clear, secure way. So it was really lovely to be like in a partnership, the three of us together. I really felt that, bringing this book together and into the world. It's a real joy.
Do you feel that maybe a fourth mind was birthed by this project? Just that all your efforts came together and you've kind of created this sort of limitless composite that encompasses all of your creativity. And then here we have this really gorgeous book. What do you think of that idea?
I love it.
I like it too, but then I think it's kind of multiple. There's all the what any reader or viewer brings to the text, and those kind of composite figures that are being rendered there in language and with the images. Uh-oh, I have a cat interruption.
We love when cats do this. Can we see your cat?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there you are.
I've been continually, I mean, just even since getting the book in my hands, my experience of the work is all over brand new again. And I assume that that's going to continue to happen, through every time I engage with the actual book. And one of the things that Kelsey Street loves to do is have special editions. And we're actually bringing out a special edition where you can buy the book and also one of the pieces. One of Cybele's pieces. So that's a whole nother way when you actually get to see it's just like unending. Yeah.
We have some questions coming through. Nancy says, I'm curious about the use of P and B and you as voices of or characters in the long poem. Could you discuss a bit?
I mean, I think, like I was saying, that I want the original story, the Kafka Brilliant Burrow, is really about a single kind of subjectivity. It's this badger-like creature who's creating this immense construction, and but in my version of it, I wanted to bring in these other kinds of characters that are also letters, and see ways in which that they could find connection and potentially some kind of solidarity within the context of this very beleaguered space.
Cool. We have a couple comments. Heidi says, what an extraordinary collaboration. Carla says, this is a wonderful conversation. Thank you. I was curious, is there a role in trance in the process for any of you, the trance state?
For sure. I mean, I guess I say that so positively, and then I'm like, well, what do you mean? So I think for me, it's a very intuitive process that involves a lot of trying to let go of knowing and connecting to material. And then I'm like, I don't know if that's what trance is. So then maybe I want to throw it back to you and ask you what you mean.
I mean, going into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, a state of consciousness where, let's say, in a waking state, you might be making coffee or moving things around or be in a conversation with someone, but a trance state would take you to a state that's closer maybe to dreaming, closer to sleep.
I think I am very interested in that space. And I am interested in there being, I think I'm interested in, I think I do something related to that, but not quite to that extreme, or not that far. But I think I am really interested, and I think in the materials and the drawing of getting of putting my mind back and sort of being much more connected to something more, a little more subconscious, letting the conscious come in at different times. When I'm out wandering around and exploring and thinking about maps, thinking about my mom and all these things, there's a lot of, it's like I can't get it's like my mind is like do. And so it's almost, to me, being in the studio often is like a desperate need to shut all that off, which I think is related to what you're talking about, but not quite so, maybe not quite there. But related, I think. And I don't know, I'm so curious what Jocelyn's answer is, but when I read Jocelyn's writing, it feels similar to that to me in the use of language and the way the letters and the words sort of, I think that's what draws me to it so much, is it sort of lets go and like of its, it lets go. It took my experience of reading it is that it comes and goes in its form and things to hold on to, and things then it like goes into some space of letting go into like, wait, where are you? And it does feel like that. So my experience of Jocelyn's work is somewhat like that. But I can't imagine writing it would be that way, because it's I don't know, Jocelyn.
My way to approach the question that you posed, Peter, is to think about how I use sound as a kind of means of, I really rely heavily on reading things aloud and sounding them out, and the sounds of them as a way, as like central to a kind of compositional practice, which in some ways subverts the sort of rational sense-making rush that we have, or need that we have, is to just be more tuned in literally to the sounds of the syllables and the words and the rhythms.
Anne asks, could Cybele talk a little bit about how she chose to sequence the collages in the book, or how all of you determined the sequence?
Yeah, it took a lot of steps to get to where I felt good about it. I started off I mean, I think in a way it goes back to the last question of starting off rational and trying to let go of that. And starting out with logic of, trying to sort of have these images, somehow connect and to the text and this, and, even, and the more I did that, like the worse it got. And then I found myself having to let go a lot, and then just really trying to think of the images, not even thinking about them, but again, working much more intuitively in terms of a flow and a feeling of the spaces that exist, and letting them flow with each other, and then thinking about pacing with language. And I had the one thing I felt is that I wanted there to be moments where you could go into the image, go into the world, which whether it's LA or the Burrow, which depends on what moment it feels one way or another. I wanted to be able to go into that, and it through the image, the same way Jocelyn goes into that through her writing, and then come out into the writing, and then have there be a flow. But that was much more intuitive. And then we did like touch base with, and like, communicate about how it felt. But that was sort of how it went, was much more based on feeling. And it's funny because every time I look at it and read it, it feels different, which I think is partially the nature of my work and Jocelyn's work. Both of our work lends itself to that, I think. But I don't know if that answers you, Anne.
Let's see. There's another question from Nancy. The inside-outside problem explored by three people is so expansive. Could you talk about this intersubjectivity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the exploration in some way, the kind of mutuality of being that these letters, creatures find themselves in, that there is a kind of dependence and interdependence that's being negotiated through these spaces that are being inhabited. And yeah, my interest in like what kinds of, under those conditions, under those kind of extreme conditions, what kinds of sort of connections and solidarities were possible.
It's so interesting hearing you say that, because like, I mean, I've just hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, that's happening in the story. And then that was happening on a different level between the three of us. So then there's a separate parallel between three characters dealing with inside, outside.
Shit, I never thought of
at
that.
the same time as there's these other three characters in I hadn't thought about it either, but having you say that, poet, artist, and editor, yeah, absolutely. And a little mirroring.
We're coming to the top of the hour. Erin, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the conversation before we wrap?
I don't think so. It's been such a joy, and I'm really excited that other people are going to get to experience the work, because I've had the pleasure for the last 2 years, and it's really rewarding to spend time with it.
Well, these are exactly the kinds of books that City Lights just cherishes. And so such a gift. Thank you so much, Erin, for all that your press does and all that you do. And Cybele, Jocelyn, really appreciate you gracing our halls tonight. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, fostering an active engagement with books, literary culture, and much, much more through our public events, our publishing program, and our educational outreach that's all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So take care, everyone. Keep warm, keep dry, stay strong. We hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.